Of the works published by René Guénon, there are three that form the core of his metaphysical exposition: man and his becoming according to the Vedanta, the multiple states of the being, and the symbolism of the cross. The symbolism of the cross deals with a symbol described by Guénon as, quote, common to almost all traditions, a fact which would seem to indicate its direct attachment to the great primordial tradition, end quote. A symbol that, like any other, contains a plurality of meanings due to the correspondences that exist between all things in the universe, but at its core is a symbol of the infinitude of the supreme principle and the development of all its possibility. This supreme principle, the only absolute metaphysical reality, infinite and therefore undetermined, without attributes, is the source of all things, but remains unaffected by them, beyond even the distinction between being and non-being, which are determinations. This is identical to the self or personality of a given being, distinct from the individuality, which does not constitute a whole by itself, that is, something that exists before its secondary parts rather than resulting from them, but is rather a composite resulting from a given set of possibilities, for example, mentality and sense. Any individual being is subject to an indefinite number of possibilities. For example, the human being is not only restricted to corporeal material existence, but also to an indefinitude of non-physical modalities of existence, all remaining at the human level. Each one of these modalities is also capable of its own indefinite development, involving its own constituent elements, such as moments in time. It may be necessary to clarify what is meant by infinite and indefinite. Infinity precedes the finite. It refers to a complete lack of conditions, and is therefore applied exclusively to the supreme principle, whether it be envisaged actively as infinite affirmation or actuality, or passively as infinite possibility. On the other hand, the indefinite is the extension of the finite with the potential, at the very least, to continue without end, such as the sequence of numbers, which begins with the finite unit and can always be extended by the addition of another unit. The indefinite possibilities of an individual being have no existence by themselves and are subject to constant change, generation, and death, but the self, the reality at the center of the being, exists independently of all conditioned existence. In the symbol of the cross, the self is represented by the vertical line, whereas the horizontal line represents the realization of the being's possibilities in a given state of existence, such as the human state, which develops outwardly from the center of the vertical line. This symbolism can be expanded upon by the addition of a third dimension to the symbol, forming the 3D cross, which is capable of acting as a system of coordinates for the entirety of space, extending from the center through all of its 6 fundamental directions. Here, the vertical line remains a symbol of the self, understood as the world axis at the center of every state. The 2 horizontal lines form the 2D cross by themselves, of which one line can be considered as relatively vertical in relation to the other, corresponding symbolically to the north-south axis of Earth. In the Hindu tradition, the 6 directions of space are symbolized as 6 rays of the sun, which sits in the center, and beyond which lies the 7th ray, which is not represented spatially in the same figure as the other 6 rays, as it belongs to a different order of things, symbolizing the full realization of the unconditioned supreme principle. This symbolic sun lies at the center of the entire representation, but as the vertical line is indefinitely long and exists simultaneously with this central point or sun outside of any particular set of conditions such as time and space, this point can be considered as being any point whatsoever on the vertical line. Since the vertical line is at the center of all states, the central point of the cross must also be the center of whichever state is under consideration. For example, the center of the human state, which is the primordial state of humanity, the end goal of the lesser mysteries, and consists of the full integration of all the possibilities that make up the individual human being back into their non-manifest principle. Having reached this central point of the state in question, it becomes possible for the being to realize the full extent of the possibilities contained in the self, and thereby become free of the contingencies of one or the other particular possibility, through an operation analogous to that of the mathematical integral, whereby a point of reference is established that allows all of the indefinite variations of a variable quantity to become integrated into a single term that encompasses them. To develop the symbol further, we can acknowledge that an indefinite number of states exist along the world axis, which can each be represented by a plane containing an indefinite number of lines, symbolizing either the different individual beings at the same degree of existence in the macrocosmic representation, or the different modalities of an individual in the microcosmic representation. The result is an indefinitely large 3D expanse, made up of an indefinitude to the power of 3, indefinitely long, indefinitely wide, and indefinitely tall. If, however, in the microcosmic representation, the lines that occupy a plane representing one state of the being are considered as absolutely straight, an inaccuracy arises from the discontinuity of those lines, when the different modalities of the being are really inseparable from each other. It would be more accurate to consider the plane as a spiral made from an indefinite amount of turns, in which the ends of each turn vary from each other by an infinitesimally small amount, almost forming a closed circle, but seamlessly following into the next turn of the spiral to trace out a further modality of the being. The same applies to the different planes. Death in one state for a given being coincides exactly with its birth in a subsequent state. Therefore, the planes themselves may be considered as spiraling around the axis in a similar way to form a helix. If these two representations are combined, such that each turn of a spiral simultaneously leads outwards and upwards, keeping in mind that each modality of a given state has its corresponding modality in any other state, the result would be something like a cylinder, indefinitely large, formed by an infinitesimally dense helicoid or helicoids with many overlapping elements. The continuity of the states of the being is often symbolized by a serpent coiled round a tree or staff, a symbol which has its horizontal equivalent in the symbol of the Ouroboros, which represents the indefinitude of a given state. By extension, the serpent becomes a symbol of conditioned existence and its unending course, which is why in myth and legend, serpentine villains often block the path to some precious item, often golden, which symbolizes the immutable principle at the center of the being, who is the hero that retrieves the precious item. The symbolism touched upon in this video is examined comprehensively and precisely in the book, of which the final words are as follows. Through consciousness of the permanent identity of being throughout all of the indefinitely multiple modifications of existence, there is manifested, at the very center of our human state, as well as at the center of all other states, the transcendent and formless, and hence unincarnated and unindividualized element, which is called the heavenly ray. This consciousness is therefore higher than any formal faculty, which means that it is essentially supra-rational, and implies intuitive perception of the law of harmony, which binds together and unites all things in the universe, and for our individual being, but independently of it, and of the conditions to which it is subject. This consciousness is no less than the sense of eternity.